It started with a whisper, one that floated out of Montecito's polished calm, like smoke curling from a fire you thought had long gone out. A whisper that carried 5 explosive words. She never carried those babies. And the woman who allegedly said it, Meghan Markle's own mother, Doria Ragland. For years, the world had speculated, theorized, and dissected every frame of Meghan's pregnancies, every fold of her maternity dresses, every absence of a hospital photo. But no one expected Doria, the quiet grandmother figure the public admired for her grace and discretion, to be the one to break the silence. Think about it for a moment. The world watched as Meghan cradled her bump on the red carpet, beamed at charity events, and spoke about motherhood as her destiny fulfilled. The palace released statements, headlines screamed joy, and royal fans shed tears of delight. It was the fairy tale chapter after all the chaos. Yet behind the glamour and perfect imagery, something never quite added up. No doctor stepped forward. No official medical records surfaced. Even the birth certificate seemed odd, delayed, or altered. And while the palace smiled, Doria's eyes often told a different story, nervous, distant, almost haunted. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Now, as Doria's recent slip of the tongue ripples through royal circles and media outlets, the question hangs heavy. Did Meghan Markle really fake the birth of Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana? And if she did, how deep does the deception go? For most, it's unthinkable. For others, it explains everything. But to understand how this moment became possible, you have to step back to the beginning, to the exact moment Meghan realized that motherhood could be her greatest shield and her most dangerous weapon. In 2018, when Meghan's engagement to Prince Harry transformed her from Hollywood actress to royal icon, the spotlight wasn't just bright, it was blinding. Every headline called her modern, progressive, a breath of fresh air. She was the woman who would rewrite royal history. Yet, barely months after the wedding, another narrative began to take shape. When would the couple have children? For the royal family, heirs are everything. For Meghan, motherhood was an opportunity, a story to be shaped, controlled, and perhaps reinvented. It was around that time, according to those close to Doria, that she began to notice subtle changes in her daughter. Meghan wasn't just ambitious anymore, she was strategic. Every move was measured for optics, every gesture rehearsed for effect. When Doria visited her in London, she noticed how Meghan spoke about crafting the perfect royal chapter, as if life itself were a Netflix script. Doria, ever the grounded mother, smiled politely. But something about the way Meghan said chapter instead of child lingered in her mind long after she flew back to Los Angeles. Then came the surprise announcement. Meghan was pregnant. The world rejoiced. The palace glowed with pride. But the timeline didn't make sense. Meghan's public appearances just weeks prior showed no sign of a baby bump. Yet suddenly she appeared in a tight-fitting dress in Australia, cradling a perfectly rounded belly. The bump grew, shrank, and grew again in bizarre patterns the press quietly joked about. The palace photographers were instructed to keep distance. And Doria? She was nowhere to be seen. Why would a mother miss her own daughter's most precious months? The official narrative claimed she was preparing to travel and needed privacy. But whispers from inside Meghan's circle told a different tale, that Doria had expressed concern. She'd asked too many questions. How are you handling the doctor visits? Which hospital will you deliver at? Do you need me there for support? Simple, maternal questions that received vague, evasive answers. One insider recalled that Doria felt pushed away when she pressed too hard. Still, she remained loyal. When the baby announcement came, Doria dutifully appeared in London. Cameras captured her walking into Frogmore Cottage, smiling faintly. But she stayed only briefly. Those who saw her describe a woman torn in two, wanting to protect her daughter, yet disturbed by something she couldn't name aloud. Meghan's public narrative was perfection, but Doria's private thoughts were chaos. Months later, when Meghan vanished from public view for maternity leave, the story took another strange turn. No confirmed hospital visits. No medical staff statements. No photographs of her entering or leaving any clinic. Just one press release from Buckingham Palace. The Duchess has gone into labor. And hours later, another. The Duchess has delivered a healthy baby boy. Simple. Clean. Controlled. Too controlled. Doria was reportedly seen arriving quietly at the Sussex residence the same day. Witnesses noticed she looked pale, withdrawn. Some said she refused to answer any questions. Others claimed she made a cryptic remark to a friend. Some truths are too big to tell. The next day, the couple posed for cameras, beaming with their newborn Archie Harrison. But even that photo raised eyebrows. The baby's appearance seemed older than a few days. The swaddling was awkward, the angles carefully cropped. And then, just like that, Meghan and Harry retreated from the public eye again. Doria's silence became the loudest sound in the room. For years, she'd been the pillar of discretion, a yoga instructor, social worker, the calm maternal energy that counterbalanced Meghan's whirlwind fame. But according to close acquaintances, something shifted after Archie's birth. Doria stopped defending her daughter in private conversations. She avoided journalists. She stopped visiting England altogether. Those around her suspected she knew something heavy enough to carry alone. Then Lilibet was born, or so the world was told. Another round of secrecy, another hospital mystery, another photo that looked suspiciously edited. Meghan's team emphasized privacy, claiming to protect the children. Yet the palace had always released genuine hospital records for every royal birth before. Why not now? Again, Doria was absent. Again, her expression in rare sightings betrayed unease. And now, years later, in what appears to be an unguarded moment during a private California event, Doria allegedly uttered the words that reignited everything. She never carried them. Imagine the shock in that room. A mother's voice, trembling yet certain. The same woman who once sat beside Meghan at her wedding, now hinting that the entire royal lineage might rest on a fabrication. Those who heard it froze, unsure whether to believe their ears. Within hours, fragments of that conversation began to circulate among journalists. Some dismissed it as gossip. Others knew better, because they'd long suspected the same. Here's where things take a darker turn. Doria, sources say, has kept meticulous notes, emails, and receipts, records from the time Meghan allegedly arranged surrogacy agreements under private contracts in California. If those documents exist, they could confirm one of the most explosive scandals in royal history. But why would Doria speak now? What pushed her over the edge after years of silence? Some point to Meghan's relentless pursuit of fame. Others whisper that Doria felt used, forced into secrecy that weighed on her conscience. Imagine watching the world adore your daughter for being a devoted mother. Knowing the truth might be something entirely different. The conflict between pride and guilt must have been unbearable. As this alleged revelation spreads, it reopens every old wound in the Sussex saga. The palace's initial skepticism toward Meghan, the rift with William and Kate, the Queen's guarded expression during baby announcements. Each moment takes on new meaning when viewed through this lens. Maybe that's why insiders claim King Charles himself has ordered a private inquiry into documentation surrounding Archie and Lilibet's births. If proven true, the implications are staggering. Fake births would mean forged royal records, manipulated lineage, and potential loss of titles. It wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be a constitutional earthquake. But even more tragic is the human cost. A daughter who may have built her empire on illusion, and a mother who could no longer bear the burden of silence. The contrast between Meghan's glittering public persona and the alleged private deception is striking. She presents herself as the champion of authenticity, advocating truth, compassion, and transparency. Yet her own mother now stands as the quiet symbol of contradiction. How does a woman preach empowerment while allegedly concealing her children's origins? How does a family built on privacy thrive on publicity? Every contradiction deepens the intrigue. And that's where the story hits hardest, not in the headlines, but in the emotional wreckage left behind. Doria, who once guided her daughter with steady wisdom, may now be the unwilling detonator of Meghan's carefully constructed kingdom. Imagine the guilt, the heartbreak, the late-night questioning. Did I raise her wrong? Did I help her deceive the world? The kind of torment that no mother should face. But perhaps Doria's revelation isn't betrayal. Perhaps it's liberation. After all, truth, no matter how painful, eventually demands to be spoken. And if her conscience could no longer carry the weight, then speaking out might have been her only salvation. For Meghan, however, the stakes couldn't be higher. Her public image already wavers under controversies, from royal feuds to failed projects. The last thing she can afford is a revelation that undermines her motherhood narrative. That's why, as insiders claim, her PR team has gone into overdrive, contacting media outlets, issuing quiet warnings, and trying to contain Doria's words before they ignite. But the more they deny, the more the world listens. Because silence, once again, speaks louder than statements. As the whispers grow into headlines, one question lingers like smoke. What does Doria truly know? Could there be proof, contracts, photos, witnesses? And if so, how long until it surfaces? Every great illusion eventually cracks. Every secret eventually finds its way into the light. And as this revelation ripples through royal walls and media networks, one can't help but wonder. If Meghan really staged both births, how far was she willing to go? This story isn't just about a mother and daughter anymore. It's about image, ambition, and the dangerous line between reinvention and deception. It's about how far someone will go to protect a crown-shaped dream, even if it means rewriting the most sacred part of life itself, birth. Because in the end, truth doesn't stay buried forever. It waits, quietly, patiently, until someone, perhaps even the person you least expect, finally sets it free. And now that Doria Ragland may have spoken, that waiting is over. But what she said next, what she allegedly revealed in private recordings and handwritten notes, might not only destroy Meghan's empire, but also expose the royal institution's own complicity in keeping the illusion alive. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started with a smile. Not just any smile, the kind that could disarm critics, melt cameras, and convince the world that everything was perfectly under control. Meghan Markle stepped out that October morning, radiant, glowing, the wind catching her dress, as if even nature wanted in on her magic. She looked every bit the expectant Duchess. But beneath the satin and sparkle, something far less perfect was unfolding. When the cameras zoomed in, you could see it, the delicate press of her hand against her belly, a performance of maternal affection rehearsed to perfection. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture cinematic. And for those who'd been paying attention, the illusion was breathtakingly complete. But how does an illusion that flawless begin? Let's rewind. Just months earlier, the royal wedding had barely faded from the world's headlines. Meghan had the press wrapped around her finger. The monarchy had found its modern face. And in that brief window of calm, before scandal began to seep in, Meghan realized something that would define her next move. The only thing more powerful than a royal bride was a royal mother. You could almost hear her say it in that crisp, confident tone. They'll never question a mother. At first, it was subtle. A few well-placed stories about how Harry and Meghan are eager to start a family. A few coy smiles in interviews, a playful touch on Harry's arm. It was the kind of slow build the tabloids lived for, anticipation, speculation, and endless clicks. But behind closed doors, according to insiders, Meghan's mind was already racing ahead. The pregnancy wasn't just about family, it was about control. The one thing she'd been fighting for since she stepped into the palace. And here's where it gets strange. In early 2018, Doria Ragland received an unexpected call from her daughter. Meghan sounded off. Excited, yes, but also rehearsed, like someone pitching a role rather than sharing personal news. "Mom, big things are coming. Just be ready," she said. Doria assumed it meant more royal engagements, more appearances. But Meghan's next words lingered. "It'll be bigger than the wedding. Much bigger." When Meghan and Harry officially announced the pregnancy during their tour of Australia, the timing was perfect, too perfect. The royal family was reeling from media fatigue, tensions between brothers were growing, and Meghan's approval ratings were slipping. A baby would change everything. The crowd cheered. The headlines exploded. The Duchess was glowing. But here's the contradiction. Within days, sharp-eyed journalists began noticing something odd. The size of Meghan's bump seemed to change dramatically from one engagement to the next. One day, barely visible. The next, a full bloom beneath her dress. Some dismissed it as lighting, camera angles, or wardrobe tricks. But others started whispering what no one dared to print. Was the bump real? Even Doria, who'd been through pregnancy herself, reportedly felt something was off. During a brief visit, she watched Meghan move carefully, almost too carefully, like a performer avoiding a wardrobe malfunction. When she asked about prenatal checkups, Meghan changed the subject. "It's different here, Mom. Everything's under royal control," she said with that reassuring smile that shut down questions before they formed. But for Doria, reassurance turned into unease. Because every mother knows the rhythm of pregnancy, the mood swings, the cravings, the fatigue. Meghan had none of it. Her energy was boundless. Her skin, flawless. Her calendar, impossibly full. She wasn't nesting. She was networking. Attending galas, walking red carpets, launching projects. Who does that in the third trimester? And then came the photo that broke the internet. Meghan, cradling her belly during a night event, the light catching her face like a halo. It became one of the most shared images of the year. But for Doria, who saw that photo from her modest Los Angeles home, something in her gut twisted. She knew that look, not of joy, of performance. Here's the part that few know. Around that time, Doria reportedly confided in an old friend, saying, "I don't think she's carrying that baby." The friend brushed it off as stress. After all, what mother would ever think her daughter capable of something like that? But Doria couldn't shake the feeling. Meanwhile, palace insiders began noticing inconsistencies too. Meghan's due date changed multiple times. The staff were instructed never to mention her hospital plans. Even the royal medical team, the same one that delivered Kate's children, was quietly replaced. Why? Meghan claimed she wanted privacy, but even for royals, such secrecy was unprecedented. The illusion deepened. Meghan's maternity wardrobe became a statement, tailored to frame the bump just so. Her interviews dripped with emotional sound bites. "Motherhood has been my dream," she told one reporter, her voice trembling on cue. The nation melted. And somewhere in California, Doria sat in silence, watching her daughter's dream play out like a movie she hadn't agreed to star in. Then came the day that changed everything. Meghan invited Doria to London weeks before the supposed due date. Doria arrived, suitcase in hand, ready to help her daughter through the birth. But instead of a bustling nursery or hospital plans, she found a house filled with assistants and PR handlers. Meghan seemed distracted, almost anxious, as if juggling multiple scripts at once. "Everything's arranged," she said flatly when Doria asked where she'd be delivering. "Arranged. Not planned. Not scheduled. Arranged." That night, Doria overheard a tense phone call from the next room. Meghan's voice was sharp, controlled. "Make sure she's comfortable, and that the paperwork matches the UK format," she said before lowering her tone. Doria didn't ask who she was talking to. She didn't have to. The words paperwork and format said enough. Over the next few days, Meghan's public bump seemed different. Firmer one day, deflated the next. When she sat, it folded unnaturally. When she stood, it swayed. Doria watched in quiet horror as her daughter adjusted it between photo ops, a subtle tug here, a careful shift there. At one event, the padding even slipped slightly beneath her dress. Meghan caught it instantly, laughing it off with a practiced wave. The press called it grace under pressure. Doria called it something else, a performance gone too far. But here's the contradiction that tore her apart. Despite everything she saw, part of Doria wanted to believe her daughter. Maybe it was just fashion trickery. Maybe she was overthinking. But deep down, she knew. A mother always knows. Then came the day of the birth. The palace announced it in a short, polished statement. Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex has gone into labor. No location. No doctor. No timestamp. Hours later, another release. The Duchess has delivered a healthy baby boy. No photographs leaving a hospital. No medical staff waving. Just words. Empty, controlled words. When Doria arrived at Frogmore Cottage that evening, she found Meghan sitting on the sofa, radiant and relaxed. Too relaxed. A baby lay in a cot nearby, silent, swaddled perfectly. Meghan smiled. "Meet your grandson." But something about that moment was wrong. The lighting, the timing, the stillness. Doria leaned over the baby. His skin was cool. His movements, mechanical. Later, she would convince herself it was just the calm of sleep. But the image of that perfectly still newborn haunted her for months. 2 days later, Meghan and Harry presented Archie to the world. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted congratulations. Meghan spoke softly about the magic of motherhood. But when Doria watched the footage later that night, she noticed something chilling. The baby's size didn't match a 2-day-old. The neck, the length, the focus of the eyes. Doria knew babies. This wasn't one fresh from birth. Still, She kept quiet. The world was celebrating. And who was she to ruin her daughter's moment? Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she was wrong. That's what she told herself as she packed her bags to return to California. But before leaving, she overheard Meghan on the phone again. Her tone was icy. "No one needs to know the details," she said. Not even her. Her. That word hit Doria like a bullet. Not even her. The illusion was complete. Meghan had the world believing in a fairy tale, and Doria was its silent casualty. She smiled for cameras, played the proud grandmother, and carried the weight of the truth back home. But the illusion wouldn't last forever. Over time, cracks began to show. The press noticed how little Archie appeared in public. No school sightings, no spontaneous outings, just staged photos. Each image more polished than the last, as if the children existed only in pixels. And then, as if on cue, came Lilibet Diana. Another pregnancy, another layer of secrecy. This time, Meghan didn't even pretend to involve the palace doctors. Doria declined to visit, citing schedule conflicts. But those close to her knew the real reason. She couldn't bear to watch it happen again. By now, Doria's private doubts had become sleepless nights. Friends noticed her distance. Her quiet sadness. One even claimed she once murmured, "It's like watching her build a house of cards in a hurricane." And she was right. Because what came next, the whispers, the hidden evidence, the palace panic, would tear that house apart, piece by piece, until the illusion finally shattered. But before it did, Doria would discover something she was never meant to see. And that discovery would change everything. What happens to a mother when she carries the heaviest secret of all, the truth about her own child? Doria Ragland used to be a woman of warmth and quiet strength. People who knew her before the royal whirlwind describe her as peaceful, centered, the kind of woman who could calm a storm with a glance. But after Archie's birth, something in her changed. Her smile grew tighter. Her posture, more careful. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed, as if she was holding something back. At first, the world didn't notice. They were too busy celebrating Meghan's newfound motherhood, the royal baby that united nations and trended on every screen. Yet behind that celebration, Doria had already begun to disappear. Have you ever seen a mother go silent when the world expects her to speak? That's the story of Doria Ragland. When Meghan presented Archie to the cameras in Windsor Castle, Doria stood quietly in the background, a proud grandmother, the picture of serenity. But people close to her remember what happened off camera. She barely spoke that day. She avoided looking directly at the baby. And when the cameras clicked, she forced a smile so faint that even royal photographers described it as melancholic. After that day, Doria vanished from the royal stage. No interviews, no photo ops, no statements. For months, not a single trace of her surfaced. Reporters tried to reach her in Los Angeles, but her neighbors said she rarely came outside. Paparazzi who used to catch her on her morning walks stopped seeing her entirely. She closed her yoga classes, canceled her charity appearances, and declined every media request that mentioned Meghan. Why? What could make a mother retreat so completely, just when the world saw her daughter as the pinnacle of success? There are two versions of that story, the one the world knows, and the one whispered behind closed doors. The public version is simple. Doria valued privacy. She wanted to stay out of the spotlight. But the private one, the one her closest confidants whisper, is far darker. According to them, Doria was silenced. Not by choice, but by design. One of Meghan's former staff members allegedly recalled overhearing a conversation between Meghan and her legal advisor. Meghan was furious about a leak involving timelines and medical questions. Her words were cold and clipped. "We need her under control. She talks when she's emotional." The staffer didn't know who she meant. Not until Doria suddenly disappeared from royal events. Soon after, Doria reportedly signed a non-disclosure agreement. Whether it was voluntary or coerced remains unclear. But those close to her noticed she stopped even mentioning Meghan's name in public. When asked about her daughter, she would smile politely and change the subject. But silence, when too heavy, begins to echo. Around late 2019, friends noticed Doria's health declining. She looked pale, thin, restless. One friend claimed she began attending therapy sessions twice a week, saying she was haunted by guilt. The friend never asked why, but every time Doria left the therapist's office, she cried quietly in her car for several minutes before driving home. In those months, Meghan and Harry began publicly waging their war against the British tabloids. Lawsuits, interviews, accusations of cruelty and invasion of privacy. They positioned themselves as victims of a merciless media machine. But even as Meghan defended her private motherhood, Doria was sinking deeper into a silence that no lawsuit could explain. Was it fear? Or was it something else, something closer to shame? One evening, Doria was seen leaving a private meeting at a Beverly Hills law office. She looked shaken. Her hands trembled as she clutched a manila envelope to her chest. That photo never made it to mainstream tabloids, but in alternative circles, it became the spark for wild theories. Some claimed she was being threatened. Others said she was finalizing something, perhaps protection for herself. Weeks later, Meghan appeared on ITV's An African Journey, wiping tears as she said, "Not many people have asked if I'm okay." It was her most vulnerable moment yet. The world sympathized. But somewhere in Los Angeles, Doria reportedly turned off her TV halfway through the interview. Because she knew Meghan wasn't okay, just not for the reasons the world believed. The mother who had once been her daughter's anchor now found herself drifting in guilt. She had witnessed something she couldn't unsee, something that contradicted the fairy tale. During one therapy session, Doria allegedly told her counselor, "I watched her lie, and I said nothing." The therapist reportedly urged her to talk to Meghan, to confront her, to clear her conscience. Doria nodded, but never did. Because confrontation meant exposure, and exposure meant the collapse of everything Meghan had built. Still, the weight of silence is a cruel companion. One night, Doria called a close friend in tears. "You don't understand," she said. "It's not what they think. It's all built on something that shouldn't exist." When the friend asked what she meant, Doria hung up. That was the last time she spoke of it. But the timing is chilling. Just days later, Meghan and Harry announced they were stepping back from royal duties. Megxit. To the public, it looked like a bold move for independence. But to Doria, it felt like an escape. Because once they left Britain, the scrutiny would fade, the questions would quiet, and the illusion could continue, free from palace oversight. And yet, even oceans away, Doria's unease didn't fade. The closer Meghan drew to Hollywood, the more performative her life became. Netflix deals, Oprah interviews, lifestyle branding, everything turned into a production. And for Doria, the parallels were impossible to ignore. It was the same performance she'd seen years ago, only now the stage was global. Those close to Doria claim she began keeping journals, daily notes about her feelings, her fears, and fragments of conversations she overheard. In one entry, she allegedly wrote, "When truth becomes a performance, even love feels like a lie." A haunting line from a woman who once radiated serenity. Then came the incident that confirmed to her she could never speak. In early 2021, a journalist from London flew to Los Angeles, claiming to be writing a positive retrospective on Meghan's journey into motherhood. They somehow found Doria's address and showed up unannounced. Instead of slamming the door, Doria invited them in for tea. For an hour, the conversation was pleasant, polite, harmless, until the journalist asked one question. "Can you describe the day Archie was born?" Doria froze. She stared at her teacup, her hands trembling slightly. That's not something I talk about," she said softly. The journalist pressed gently, asking about the hospital, the doctors, the moment she first held her grandson. Doria's eyes filled with tears. She smiled faintly and said, "Some memories don't belong to me anymore." When the journalist left, Doria locked the door, pulled the blinds shut, and reportedly didn't leave the house for 3 days. She knew what she had just said, and how easily it could be twisted. She also knew someone would tell Meghan, and Meghan did find out. Days later, Doria received a call from her daughter's assistant, not Meghan herself. The message was simple and cold. "Please refrain from speaking to any media. Ever." From that moment, Doria's isolation was complete. She stopped attending events, even family gatherings. She refused invitations to charity functions that once gave her joy. And in photos from that period, her expression tells a story no words can. A woman fading behind her own daughter's shadow, silenced by secrets too heavy to share. But silence breeds curiosity. The fewer words Doria spoke, the more people wanted to hear them. Conspiracy theorists began connecting dots, analyzing her body language, her absences, her sudden disappearance from Meghan's life. One investigative blogger even compiled every time Doria had been seen with Meghan and noticed something bizarre. She was present at every public photo op that framed the family image and absent from every private moment tied to actual motherhood. Coincidence? Or choreography? If you've ever lied to protect someone you love, you know how guilt gnaws at you in silence. You begin to flinch at every question, to rewrite your memories, to wish you could undo it all. That's what Doria lived with. Every smile on Meghan's face reminded her of what wasn't true. Every royal event reminded her of what was hidden. But here's where the story takes a turn. In mid-2021, after the birth of Lilibet, Doria began receiving anonymous letters. Plain envelopes. No return address. Inside, printed photos. Some appeared to show Meghan at a private facility in California, dressed casually, not pregnant. Others showed vehicles arriving late at night, carrying unmarked crates. Doria's heart pounded as she looked at them. Was someone warning her? Or threatening her? She didn't tell Meghan. She didn't tell anyone. But she did something unexpected. She placed them in a safety deposit box under a friend's name. Why? Because maybe, deep down, she knew this silence wouldn't last forever. Doria's disappearance wasn't cowardice. It was survival. She was trapped in a story too dangerous to tell, written by someone she once rocked to sleep. And yet, even the best-kept silence has an expiration date. Because when Doria finally resurfaced, it wasn't with a press statement or an interview. It was with one accidental sentence, whispered into the wrong ear at the wrong moment. A whisper that would unravel everything. And that whisper was only the beginning. Because what Doria said next, in private, to someone she trusted, would send shockwaves through the royal world, the media, and even Meghan herself. The first time the word surrogacy entered the royal rumor mill, it was dismissed as tabloid nonsense, a cruel invention of gossip sites hungry for clicks. But behind closed doors, it wasn't the tabloids whispering. It was insiders, assistants, medical staff, and quietly, Doria Ragland. It all began with one offhand comment, muttered in a California cafe years before Meghan ever set foot in Buckingham Palace. If I ever have kids. If I ever have kids, Meghan allegedly told a friend during brunch at a trendy Los Angeles cafe long before her royal engagement. I'll do it my way. Cameras off. No pain, no paparazzi. The friend laughed, thinking it was typical Hollywood bravado. But years later, that comment would resurface as something else entirely. A hint, perhaps, of a plan already forming. Because in Hollywood, image isn't just everything, it's survival. And Meghan had learned that lesson early. She'd seen actresses lose roles after gaining weight, watched colleagues vanish from screens after messy divorces, and knew that motherhood, in that world, was a double-edged sword. It made you beloved, but also replaceable. That's why, when whispers about surrogacy began to trace their way from Hollywood back to Windsor, those who knew Meghan before royalty weren't shocked. They were simply quiet. But let's rewind to when those whispers started to make sense. After Archie's so-called birth, royal aides began noticing strange inconsistencies in documentation. Some forms had been filed late. Others carried signatures from medical professionals who'd since retired or moved abroad. And yet, whenever someone asked Meghan for clarification, they were met with a smile and a deflection. We're doing things differently, she'd say. Modern parents, modern rules. But Doria, she wasn't smiling. She'd been in California months before the pregnancy became public, and during that time, neighbors claimed she'd received several mysterious packages, thick envelopes delivered by private courier. One afternoon, a deliveryman reportedly overheard Doria say on the phone, "Yes, I'll make sure she reviews the contract." He assumed she was speaking about one of her yoga clients. Only later, when the media began buzzing about the surrogate theory, did that small detail seem to matter. Because who else would Meghan trust to oversee something so sensitive, so secret, if not her own mother? The first concrete whispers of surrogacy surfaced among a small group of British correspondents who covered the royal beat. One described getting a tip from a Hollywood insider, claiming Meghan had met with a private fertility agency in Los Angeles months before announcing her pregnancy. The meeting, they said, involved reproductive arrangements, a delicate phrase that sounded more clinical than maternal. Most dismissed it, but a handful of reporters quietly began digging. And what they found was unsettling. Records from one elite Beverly Hills fertility clinic showed visits from someone using the alias M. Windsor, paid in cash, always after hours. The paperwork listed surrogate consultation as the purpose. Of course, aliases are common among celebrities, a way to avoid attention. But the timing of those visits matched perfectly with Meghan's supposed conception timeline. Coincidence? Or coordination? Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Doria was growing increasingly nervous. Friends noticed she was restless, often stepping out mid-conversation to take phone calls. She was juggling something, one friend said. You could tell she was in over her head, but she'd never say what it was. During one of those calls, she reportedly said something cryptic. She can't go through it herself. It's not safe. Not now. Not safe. Not now. Those words would echo later when people began asking why Meghan's pregnancy seemed so off. Why she guarded every detail. Why she refused royal medical oversight. Why even her due date was treated like a state secret. And here's where the contradictions pile up. In the palace, Meghan was playing the perfect duchess. In California, paperwork was being shuffled behind the scenes. A contract allegedly drafted between two private entities, one representing Meghan's financial interests, another representing a donor party. The document was rumored to include a clause requiring lifelong confidentiality and a substantial payout upon delivery. No one could prove it, of course. The royals' lawyers ensured those records, if they existed, were locked away or destroyed. But fragments leaked, enough to paint a shadow of a picture. Now, ask yourself this. Why would Doria, who was always protective, grounded, and reserved, start avoiding her daughter's calls around that time? Why would she suddenly fly to London weeks before the official due date if she already knew what was going to happen? Unless she wasn't there to witness the birth, but to facilitate the cover-up. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? There's one story that circulated quietly among palace staff, one that never made it to the press. A senior aide recalled overhearing a heated argument between Prince Harry and a senior royal doctor. The doctor had been informed that Meghan would not be delivering at the Lindo Wing, the traditional royal hospital, and that her chosen private arrangement was non-negotiable. That's not how this family operates, the doctor protested. Harry reportedly slammed his hand on the table and said, "It's how my family operates now." And just like that, royal protocol shattered. Doria, meanwhile, was torn. To her friends, she confided that she didn't understand what Meghan was doing or why. But she also feared losing her daughter completely. "She's not the same girl I raised," she allegedly told one old colleague. "She's calculating, like she's producing her own life." When Meghan and Harry stepped out for that first baby photo in Windsor Castle, Doria's name was mentioned briefly, the proud grandmother visiting from California. Yet, she never appeared again in any meaningful capacity. She wasn't there for Archie's first outings, nor for Lilibet's birth years later. And now we might understand why. She wasn't just keeping quiet, she was keeping distance. Because she knew what had been arranged. The surrogate, if the whispers are true, was reportedly someone from Meghan's inner circle, not a stranger. A woman in her late 30s, financially struggling, discreet, and loyal. She vanished shortly after the alleged delivery. No photos, no interviews, no trace. It was as if she'd been erased from existence. Some say she relocated to another country under a new name. Others claim she was paid enough to retire quietly. Still, one detail lingers. Doria allegedly met this woman once. And whatever passed between them haunted her ever since. Now, let's fast forward to the Sussexes' move to California. Meghan's re-entry into Hollywood brought with it a renewed sense of control. She'd escaped the rigid palace walls and stepped into a world where illusion was power. And yet, those same Hollywood circles began murmuring again. A former entertainment lawyer who'd worked with Meghan in her Suits days reportedly said, "She's always known how to curate a narrative. But the motherhood one, that was her masterpiece." Even Oprah noticed the secrecy. During the infamous interview, Meghan dodged personal questions about her pregnancies with practiced ease. She painted herself as a victim of press intrusion, turning the conversation away from logistics and toward emotion. It worked for a while. The audience empathized. But behind the scenes, producers were baffled at the gaps in her story. Where were the doctors? Where were the witnesses? Where was Doria? Doria, by then, had retreated into complete isolation. Friends who visited her described a woman consumed by quiet anxiety. Her phone was always on silent, her blinds always drawn, and one phrase, repeated more than once, stuck with them. There's something no one should know. Meanwhile, the surrogacy whispers had become a digital wildfire. Online communities began dissecting Meghan's photos, comparing angles, zooming in on frames where her bump seemed to fold unnaturally. Moon bumps, they called them, prosthetics used in film and fashion. At first, it was dismissed as conspiracy nonsense. But then came the clip, one brief video from a royal engagement, where Meghan bent down to greet a child, and her stomach appeared to shift unnaturally. The clip went viral overnight. Comment sections exploded. Did it just deflate? Someone wrote. How is that even possible? Meghan's PR team scrambled. The footage was flagged, buried, reframed as optical illusion. But the damage was done. The idea had taken root. And once a story like that begins to breathe, it's impossible to kill. Even inside Hollywood circles, whispers grew louder. An anonymous producer claimed Meghan once confided during a private dinner, "They'll never forgive me if they find out." The room went silent. Someone laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a joke. Meghan smiled that same flawless smile and changed the subject. But Doria, thousands of miles away, was no longer smiling. Because in her possession, according to one insider, were copies of old documents. Emails, appointment confirmations, maybe even payment trails. Things she had once promised never to reveal. She kept them locked away, not out of spite, but out of fear. Fear that her silence might one day make her complicit. And that fear only deepened after Lilibet's birth. Once again, no hospital photos, no medical verification, not even a proper christening photo released publicly. Meghan insisted the child was born in Santa Barbara, yet no one, not even nearby staff, recalled any unusual hospital activity that day. The illusion had repeated itself, this time across continents. So how did these whispers move from hidden corners of Hollywood to the heart of Windsor? Simple. Royal gossip is an ecosystem. Assistants talk. Lawyers leak. Photographers notice patterns. A single misstep, a forged document, a conflicting statement, becomes fuel for speculation. And once Doria's name re-entered the conversation, those whispers turned into waves. Because now, people weren't just asking if Meghan used a surrogate. They were asking if Doria knew. And if she did, why she stayed silent. Was it love, fear, or guilt? Some say Doria stayed quiet because she hoped her daughter would one day tell the truth herself. Others believe she was warned. That silence was her only protection. But whatever the reason, one thing is certain. Doria's conscience wasn't at peace. Late one night, a neighbor heard her talking to herself on the porch. "I raised her better than this," she whispered. "I just didn't raise her to be honest." Those words, caught by accident, would never leave the person who heard them, because they revealed not malice, but heartbreak. A mother, betrayed by her daughter's ambition. A daughter, trapped by her own deception. And two worlds, Hollywood and royalty, colliding in a storm of lies too large to contain. But storms don't just destroy, they expose. And when one secret began to leak, a document, a payment, a name, it set off a chain reaction that would reach the highest levels of Buckingham Palace. The whispers became official. The palace began to investigate. And Doria's quiet guilt was about to become public knowledge. It was supposed to be a routine absence. A short, private trip for rest, away from the cameras and the noise of royal life. That's what the palace told the press. But the truth, the real reason Meghan Markle flew to California just weeks before Archie's supposed birth, was far more secretive and far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Officially, Meghan was on maternity leave. Unofficially, she had vanished. No public sightings, no photos, no reliable records of her movements. Even senior palace aides didn't know where she was. They only knew one thing. She wasn't in London. The jet left late at night, no media coverage, no official flight manifest under her name. Sources say she used a pseudonym, Meghan Windsor, spelled with one H missing, and flew on a private charter linked to one of Harry's longtime friends. Security was tight, staff was minimal. Doria, however, was already waiting at the other end. So what was this trip really for? In public, it was self-care. In private, it was something else, a meeting. Weeks before, Meghan had allegedly made contact with a wellness clinic nestled in the hills outside Los Angeles. Not a hospital, not a spa, something in between, an exclusive, ultra-private facility that catered to the world's richest and most image-conscious women. The clinic specialized in fertility treatments, postnatal recovery, and, according to certain clients, surrogacy management. And on that trip, Meghan wasn't visiting as a patient. She was visiting as a planner. Doria drove her there herself. No royal vehicles, no visible bodyguards, just a low-profile black SUV that disappeared through the clinic gates at dawn. Inside, Meghan reportedly met with a team of professionals. 2 lawyers, 1 medical coordinator, and a woman whose identity remains a mystery to this day. The staff later described Meghan's demeanor as calm, rehearsed, and commanding. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't glowing with maternal joy. She was negotiating. According to a former employee, Meghan laid out her requirements clearly. Confidentiality above all. No leaks, no press, and no connections to the UK, she said firmly. She offered a financial guarantee so large it silenced every question. And as the meeting wrapped up, one witness overheard something chilling, Meghan saying, "She'll be compensated when it's done." Those who heard that line didn't understand what it meant at the time. But now, in hindsight, it's impossible not to interpret it as a reference to the surrogate. When the meeting ended, Meghan and Doria reportedly spent the night at a gated estate owned by a close Hollywood associate. The next morning, she vanished again, this time for nearly 3 days. Her phone was switched off, her location untraceable. When she finally reappeared, she seemed refreshed, glowing, and oddly serene. So, where was she during those missing 72 hours? That's the question royal investigators and journalists would spend years trying to answer. Some believe she was finalizing paperwork tied to the surrogacy arrangement. Others think she met privately with the woman who would later carry Archie. There's even a rumor, too bizarre to ignore, that Meghan visited a private birthing center to prepare staged delivery footage that could later be passed off as authentic. If true, that would mean she was planning every frame of her motherhood before the world even knew she was pregnant. But here's the contradiction that no one in the palace could explain. When Meghan returned to the UK, her pregnancy suddenly advanced by weeks. She appeared visibly larger, her bump more pronounced, her demeanor softer, almost maternal overnight. And yet, she never once allowed a royal physician near her. King Charles, then still Prince of Wales, reportedly asked Harry privately, "Why all the secrecy? Every royal birth has medical oversight." Harry's answer was defensive and curt. "Because this one isn't like the others." Even the Queen noticed. Her aides documented that Meghan declined to share her birth plan with the family, something unheard of in royal tradition. Normally, expectant royals collaborate with palace doctors to ensure protocol and safety. Meghan refused. Instead, she insisted that everything, from location to timing, remain strictly private. When Doria returned from California shortly after Meghan's hidden trip, she was a different woman. Neighbors say she looked troubled, distracted. She stopped answering her phone, canceled her classes, and spent long hours alone in her backyard. A friend recalled asking her if she was excited about becoming a grandmother. Doria's reply was haunting. "It's complicated." Complicated. That word would become a shadow over everything that followed. Behind the walls of Frogmore Cottage, tensions ran high. Palace insiders say Meghan and Harry began fighting constantly with staff. Orders were being issued, then retracted. Security teams were replaced. And one royal aide was reportedly dismissed after questioning inconsistencies in Meghan's schedule. Meanwhile, Doria was caught in the middle, torn between loyalty and conscience. She had driven her daughter to that meeting in California. She had seen the paperwork. She had heard the terms. And now, she was being asked to play her part, the supportive mother, the doting grandmother. The guilt gnawed at her. During one late-night call to a friend, Doria allegedly said, "She's gone too far. I told her this would end badly." The friend asked what she meant. Doria didn't answer. She simply hung up and cried. But by then, it was too late to stop anything. The machinery was already in motion. Meghan's team had prepared press statements, photo plans, even alternate timelines in case the media pressed too hard. Every detail had been accounted for, except Doria's conscience. And then came a moment that would change everything for her. While in London, Meghan received a package, hand-delivered, no sender listed. Inside were photos, blurry, time-stamped, taken outside that California clinic. They showed Meghan's car entering and leaving the premises. Doria immediately recognized it. She panicked. She knew the implications. If those photos leaked, the illusion would collapse overnight. Meghan, however, didn't panic. She simply smiled and said, "Don't worry. We'll handle it." She shredded the envelope, tossed the remnants into the fireplace, and went back to rehearsing her upcoming public appearance. That calm, that terrifying calm, shook Doria more than the photos themselves. She wasn't scared, Doria later told a confidant. She was proud. It was at that moment that Doria realized her daughter wasn't just protecting a lie. She was mastering it. When Meghan stepped out for her next royal event, glowing and confident, the world swooned. The bump was perfect. The speech was heartfelt. The cameras adored her. But Doria, standing in the background, couldn't shake the image of that clinic, those contracts, and that silent surrogate somewhere across the ocean carrying the child the world believed was Meghan's. For weeks, Doria avoided eye contact with her daughter. Meghan noticed, of course. One afternoon, during tea at Frogmore, she snapped, "Mom, if you can't handle this, go home." Those words broke something in Doria. She realized she wasn't a mother in that moment. She was a liability. When she finally returned to California, Doria was a ghost of herself. Her friends asked why she seemed so withdrawn. She brushed them off, saying she was just tired. But deep down, she knew she had crossed a moral line. She had driven her daughter to a secret meeting that would deceive not just a family, not just a nation, but the world. And she feared that one day, the truth would find its way back to her doorstep. Because secrets, especially royal ones, never stay buried. They linger, waiting for a crack in the wall, a careless word, a wrong ally, a late-night confession. And for Doria, that crack was coming. But before it did, something unexpected happened. Weeks after Archie's birth, Doria received a letter. No signature, no return address, just 5 words scrawled in shaky handwriting. You know she didn't deliver. That letter sent her spiraling. Was someone watching her? Threatening her? Or simply confirming what she already knew? Either way, she locked the letter away. And with it, she locked away her peace of mind. Because the hidden trip, that single journey to California, had birthed more than just scandal. It had birthed fear, the kind that eats away at a mother's soul until silence becomes her only refuge. And that silence would hold, until it didn't. Every elaborate illusion has one thing in common, a blueprint, a step-by-step plan that makes the impossible look effortless. And Meghan Markle's alleged birth deception, if true, was no different. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale, the glowing duchess, the loving husband, the perfect bump. But behind the scenes, a script was being written, one that required precision, secrecy, and absolute loyalty. Because when you're faking the most sacred act of life, one wrong move can bring it all crashing down. The moment Meghan returned from that hidden California trip, she began to assemble her team. Not doctors, not midwives, handlers. A royal aide later confessed, under anonymity, that Meghan created what she called Project Nest. To the palace, it sounded wholesome, a code name for preparing the nursery and birth. But among her inner circle, it meant something else entirely. The coordination of her private, birthing narrative. According to sources close to Doria, it started with 3 lists: what to reveal, what to conceal, and what to invent. The first list was easy, reveal just enough to seem transparent. A few public outings showing her bump, some smiling photos with Harry, and perhaps one carefully staged interview about motherhood. The second list, what to conceal, was longer. Medical appointments, doctors' names, ultrasound images, and any location tied to the supposed delivery. Everything real was to vanish into thin air. And the third list, what to invent, was the heart of the plan. A timeline, a hospital, witnesses who would never exist. The details were stunningly specific. According to one insider who saw fragments of the communications, Meghan's team drafted several potential birth scenarios. They discussed everything from lighting conditions for post-delivery photos to the type of blanket the baby would be wrapped in. It was like planning a movie scene, the insider said. She even used storyboards. To the staff at Frogmore Cottage, things began to feel off. They were instructed to sign confidentiality agreements longer than most film contracts. They couldn't discuss deliveries, phone calls, or even the color of nursery wallpaper. And when someone slipped and asked Meghan about her hospital choice, she responded coolly, "The location doesn't matter. The story does." Doria was there through it all, watching, silent. She saw the boxes arrive late at night, equipment, props, lighting kits, camera gear, not for medical use, but for presentation. There was even talk, one staff member later claimed, of a private photo shoot to capture the right angles after the baby's arrival. Still, there was a problem. To fake a birth, you need a cover that no one can question, and Meghan had chosen the perfect one: royal privacy. By claiming she wanted to do things differently, to protect her child from the press, she ensured that no one could challenge her secrecy without appearing cruel. "The palace has been too intrusive," she told aides. "We're taking control this time." And so the stage was set. A few days before the supposed labor date, Meghan's schedule went dark. No appearances, no photographs. Her car was spotted leaving Frogmore one evening, curtains drawn, escorted by security. The press assumed she was heading to the hospital. But hours later, royal correspondents received a brief note from the palace. "The Duchess has gone into labor." Only, she hadn't. That same night, across the Atlantic, another event was unfolding, one no one would know about until much later. In a discreet Los Angeles facility, a woman under heavy confidentiality reportedly went into labor. The timing matched the palace's announcement almost exactly. Was it coincidence? Or choreography? By morning, the palace released another statement. "The Duchess of Sussex has delivered a healthy baby boy." Yet no one outside their circle saw her enter or leave any hospital. No nurses came forward. No security footage ever surfaced. Doria was with Meghan when the announcement went live. She later described that moment, privately, as surreal. Her daughter sitting on the sofa, scrolling through glowing headlines while cradling a baby that, according to those close to the scene, looked suspiciously older than a newborn. Hours later, an official photographer arrived to take the now famous Windsor Castle photo. But even that, sources claim, had been meticulously orchestrated. The lighting, the baby's wrap, Meghan's posture, every frame had been planned in advance. One aide recalled Meghan insisting that the baby's face must be partly covered, for privacy. But was it privacy? Or protection from being recognized as someone else's child? Doria's heart sank as she watched the shoot unfold. The baby barely moved. Meghan held him at a precise angle, making sure no close-up shots were taken. And when reporters asked where the delivery took place, Meghan smiled and said, "It was a very peaceful experience." Peaceful, yet untraceable. After the photos, Meghan withdrew completely. No public appearances, no spontaneous outings. The palace cited recovery time. But within the walls of Frogmore, things were anything but peaceful. Doria later confided that Meghan was unusually defensive, even paranoid. She checked locks repeatedly, kept blinds closed, and instructed staff never to let anyone near the nursery without her permission. She was guarding something, one insider said. Not just a baby, a secret. Meanwhile, the palace began to grow uneasy. Royal officials quietly requested the official birth certificate. When it arrived, it was curiously vague. The hospital listed was unfamiliar, and the attending physician's name couldn't be verified. Within weeks, the document was amended, another red flag. That's when King Charles allegedly began asking questions. Discreetly, of course. The monarchy thrives on silence. But behind the scenes, an inquiry had begun. Harry, protective as ever, pushed back. "Leave it alone," he reportedly told a senior royal. "You'll only make it worse." But the truth has a way of bleeding through cracks. One palace aide claimed that in the days following the birth announcement, several calls were made to Los Angeles from Meghan's private line. Long calls, hours at a time. She was checking on something, the aide said. Or someone. Doria knew exactly who that someone was. And it haunted her. Weeks later, the woman believed to be the surrogate disappeared from public records. Her address was changed, her phone disconnected. It was as if she'd never existed. Doria suspected she'd been paid off and relocated. The enormity of it made her sick. "Do you know what it feels like to be part of something that big and that wrong?" she asked a close friend months later. "You can't sleep. You can't eat. Every noise feels like someone knocking at your conscience." But Meghan wasn't losing sleep. She was preparing for the next act. The fake birth plan had worked flawlessly. The press celebrated her for her grace. Fans adored her for choosing privacy over tradition. She had turned secrecy into virtue. And just as the story began to settle, Meghan took it a step further, filing legal paperwork that would cement Archie's place in royal succession. It was the final stroke of genius. Once the baby was listed in the official lineage, questioning his birth became nearly impossible without challenging the crown itself. Still, cracks appeared. Insiders noticed how Meghan avoided casual talk about labor or delivery. Unlike other royal mothers, she never recounted the moment he arrived. Instead, she spoke in vague platitudes about the miracle of motherhood. Even Harry's accounts were inconsistent. In interviews, he stumbled when asked about details. Sometimes he said Meghan was amazing through the delivery. Other times, he referred to the moment we became parents, as if it were something witnessed rather than experienced. To the world, these were harmless slips. But to those who knew the truth, they were tells, signs of a story rehearsed too often, told too carefully. And then came the next twist. Months later, rumors surfaced that Meghan was already trying for baby number 2. The palace rolled its eyes, the media salivated. But for Doria, it was a nightmare repeating itself. She called Meghan in a panic. "Please don't do this again," she begged. "You don't need to." Meghan's response was ice. "You don't understand, Mom. They expect it. And I always deliver what they expect." Deliver. The word sent chills down Doria's spine. It was then she realized this wasn't about motherhood at all. It was about power. Meghan had turned birth itself into performance, a controlled narrative that no one could challenge without looking cruel or conspiratorial. But power built on lies is fragile. As months passed, inconsistencies in documents, timelines, and photos began to resurface online. Bloggers and analysts started dissecting everything, comparing lighting, timestamps, even the baby's apparent age. Meghan's team called it harassment. But behind palace doors, the whispers grew too loud to ignore. And then, the final stroke of irony came from Doria herself. One sleepless night, she opened a drawer where she'd hidden fragments of the plan, copies of flight receipts, emails, and that one unburned document, the preliminary birth announcement draft written days before Archie's alleged delivery. At the top, in Meghan's neat handwriting, were the words, "Timing is everything." Doria stared at that line for a long time. She realized that her daughter hadn't just faked a birth, she'd faked time itself. She had manipulated the calendar, rewritten the sequence, blurred the line between reality and performance until even those closest to her couldn't tell which was which. And that's when Doria began keeping her own records. Not out of spite, out of fear. Because if Meghan's illusion ever unraveled,